I'm Margaret, 62 years old, and I've been married to Richard for 38 years. We built our life together from nothing, a small apartment in Brooklyn, 2 kids we raised with love and sacrifice, and a modest but comfortable existence in suburban Connecticut. Richard works in corporate finance, and over the years, his career flourished while I dedicated myself to our family, volunteering at the local library and managing our home. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but I believed we had something solid, something real. When Richard told me about his company's annual charity gala 3 weeks ago, I was genuinely excited. It had been months since we'd dressed up and gone somewhere fancy together. The event was being held at the prestigious Riverside Manor, an elegant venue overlooking the Hudson River, and it promised to be the social event of the season for his company. "You'll love it, Maggie," Richard said that evening over dinner, using the nickname he'd called me since our dating days. Black tie, live orchestra, incredible food. Everyone from the office will be there with their spouses. I spent the following weeks preparing. I went to 3 different boutiques before finding the perfect navy blue evening gown that made me feel elegant without trying too hard. I scheduled appointments for my hair and nails. I even bought new shoes, despite my practical nature usually rebelling against such expenses. This felt important, a chance to be part of Richard's professional world, to stand beside him as his partner. The morning of the gala, Richard seemed distracted during breakfast. He barely touched his coffee and kept checking his phone with an intensity that made my stomach tighten with unease. "Everything okay?" I asked, buttering my toast. Fine, he muttered, not meeting my eyes. "Just some last-minute work things. You know how it is before these events." I didn't push. After nearly 4 decades together, I'd learned when to give him space. But something felt off, like a discordant note in a familiar song. That evening, as I finished getting ready, I looked at myself in the full-length mirror in our bedroom. The gown fit beautifully, my hair was styled in soft waves, and I'd applied makeup with more care than usual. I felt pretty, not like a young woman anymore, but confident in my own skin, proud of the life I'd lived and the person I'd become. Richard appeared in the doorway, already dressed in his tuxedo. For a moment, I saw a flash of something in his eyes. Was it guilt? But it vanished so quickly, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. "You look nice," he said flatly, adjusting his cufflinks. Nice. After all my preparation, after 38 years together, nice was all he could muster. I swallowed the disappointment and smiled. "You look handsome," I replied, meaning it. He did. Richard had aged well, his salt and pepper hair giving him a distinguished look. The drive to Riverside Manor took 40 minutes. The October evening was crisp, with leaves dancing across the road in shades of crimson and gold. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, and under different circumstances, I would have found it romantic. Instead, the silence in the car felt heavy, suffocating. "Richard, are you sure everything's all right?" I ventured as we approached the venue. "Margaret, please, I'm just focused on tonight. It's important for my career." His tone was sharp, dismissive. I fell silent, staring out the window as the elegant manor came into view. Riverside Manor was breathtaking, a historic stone building with ivy climbing its walls, surrounded by manicured gardens and overlooking the river. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway as couples in evening wear made their way toward the glowing entrance. As Richard pulled into the valet area, my excitement battled with the growing knot of anxiety in my stomach. He handed the keys to a young attendant and started walking toward the entrance without waiting for me. I hurried to catch up, my new shoes already pinching my feet. "Richard, slow down," I called. He paused, barely, his jaw tight. "We're late." "We're 15 minutes early," I countered, checking my watch. He didn't respond, just resumed his brisk pace. I followed him up the stone steps, feeling increasingly like an afterthought rather than his companion for the evening. The entrance hall was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, marble floors gleamed under soft lighting, and the sound of a string quartet drifted from somewhere deeper in the building. Elegantly dressed people milled about, champagne glasses in hand, their laughter and conversation creating a sophisticated buzz. Richard scanned the crowd, his body language tense. Then I saw his shoulders relax slightly, as his eyes found someone across the room. "There's Jim from accounting," he said. "I need to talk to him about the quarterly reports. Why don't you—" He paused, and what he said next would replay in my mind for weeks to come. "Don't worry about a seat. Just mingle for a bit. I'll find you later." Before I could respond, he was gone, disappearing into the crowd with a speed that felt almost desperate. I stood there, alone in my beautiful gown, clutching my small evening bag, feeling suddenly invisible despite being surrounded by people. This wasn't how I'd imagined the evening starting. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that Richard was networking, that this was important for his career. I could be understanding. I could be patient. I made my way toward the main ballroom, following the flow of guests. The room was spectacular. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the river, where the last light of day shimmered on the water. Round tables draped in white linen filled the space, each adorned with elaborate centerpieces of white roses and candles. A stage at the far end held the orchestra, currently playing something classical and soothing. I began looking for our assigned table, checking the elegant place cards at each setting. The tables were numbered, and according to the invitation I'd seen at home, we were at table 7. I walked through the room, smiling politely at strangers, searching. Table 1, executives and their wives, already seated and chatting animatedly. Table 2, more senior staff. I continued searching, my confusion growing. Table 7 should have been in this section, but I couldn't find it. "Excuse me." I approached a woman in a staff uniform carrying a clipboard. "I'm looking for table 7? She consulted her list. "Table 7? That's in the river room, ma'am. Through those doors to the left." "The river room?" I hadn't seen that mentioned anywhere. "Are you sure?" "Yes, ma'am. Tables 1 through 12 are here in the grand ballroom. Tables 13 through 20 are in the river room. But I'm looking for table 7, I repeated, certain there must be a mistake. She checked again, her finger running down the list. "Margaret Peterson, table 7, river room." The smaller venue next door. A cold feeling settled in my chest. "Is there another table 7 in here? In the grand ballroom?" "No, ma'am. Just the one in the river room." I thanked her and made my way toward the indicated doors, my mind racing. Why would we be in a different room? Richard had said everyone from the office would be here. My hands trembled slightly as I pushed through the doors. The river room was indeed smaller, though still nicely appointed. But it was immediately clear this was the overflow space. The decor was simpler, the atmosphere more casual, and the guests seemed to be a mix of administrative staff, +1s, and people I didn't recognize from Richard's stories about his colleagues. I found table 7 in the corner. My place card sat there, Margaret Peterson, next to one that read, Susan Chen, but there was no card for Richard. I stared at the table, my heart pounding, trying to make sense of this. "Are you Margaret?" A friendly voice interrupted my thoughts. A woman about my age with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair smiled at me. "I'm Susan. Looks like we're table mates." "Yes, I'm Margaret," I managed, still processing. "Do you work with the company?" "Oh no, I'm here with my husband, David. He's in IT. Where's your husband seated?" That was the question, wasn't it? "I'm not sure," I admitted. "I think there might have been a mix-up with the seating arrangements." Susan's expression shifted, a knowing sympathy crossing her features that made my stomach drop. "Oh, honey, you might want to check the main ballroom. Sometimes the primary employees sit in there while spouses are out here. Budget constraints or something. They try to maximize networking opportunities." The implication hit me like a physical blow. I'd been separated from Richard intentionally. He was in the grand ballroom with his colleagues, and I'd been relegated to the overflow room with other spouses deemed less important to the company's networking agenda. And Richard knew. "Don't worry about a seat," he'd said. Not, "Let me show you to our table," or "Let's find where we're sitting." He'd known I wouldn't be sitting with him, and he'd deliberately not told me. "Excuse me," I mumbled to Susan, needing to confirm this before I let myself fully absorb the humiliation. I walked back through the doors into the grand ballroom, scanning the tables with new purpose. And then I saw it, table 3, prominently positioned near the stage. There sat Richard, looking completely comfortable, laughing at something the woman beside him had said. His place card clearly read, Richard Peterson. Next to him, where a spouse should sit, was another place card. I couldn't read the name from where I stood, but the woman sitting there was young, perhaps in her early 30s, with sleek dark hair and a stunning red dress. She leaned toward Richard as she spoke, her hand briefly touching his arm in a gesture that seemed far too familiar. I watched, frozen, as Richard smiled at her. Not the distracted, dismissive smile he'd given me earlier, but a genuine, warm smile I hadn't seen directed at me in years. She laughed at something he said, her head tilting back, and he looked pleased, energized in a way I barely recognized. The evening's activities were about to begin, with a company executive approaching the microphone on stage. I needed to decide, confront Richard now and cause a scene, or retreat to my assigned table and process this privately. My mother's voice echoed in my head, "Don't make a spectacle of yourself, Margaret." But another voice, one I'd been suppressing for too long, whispered, "When did you become so afraid to demand respect?" I turned and walked back to the river room, my mind reeling. Susan greeted me with a gentle smile as I took my seat, and I was grateful she didn't immediately pepper me with questions. The table gradually filled with other guests. David, Susan's husband, a quiet man who worked in the IT department, Linda and Mark, whose connection to the company I never quite understood, and 3 others whose names I barely registered. As dinner service began, I went through the motions, making polite conversation, tasting food I couldn't really appreciate, laughing at the right moments. But my mind was in the grand ballroom, replaying the image of Richard with that woman, the ease of their interaction, the way he'd hidden the truth from me. During the main course, Susan leaned over. "I'm sorry if this is too forward, but are you okay? You seem upset." Something about her genuine concern broke through my carefully maintained composure. "My husband is in the other room," I said quietly, "seated next to a woman I've never met. And he deliberately didn't tell me we wouldn't be sitting together." Susan's expression hardened with understanding. "That's Robert Chen's move," she said, her voice bitter. "He's one of the senior partners. 3 years ago, he started this policy of separating spouses at the Gala to maximize professional networking. Code for letting the executives cozy up to the younger female employees without their wives watching. That can't be legal," I said. Though even as I spoke, I knew it wasn't about legality. It was about respect, about value, about how much our decades of partnership meant when measured against career advancement and the allure of someone younger. "It's not about legal," Susan replied. "It's about what they can get away with. And most of us put up with it because our husbands ask us to. Because confronting it means causing problems, risking jobs, making things uncomfortable." David, Susan's husband, shifted uncomfortably. "It's not that simple, Sue. The company culture is very competitive. If you're not seen as a team player—" "I don't want to hear it, David," Susan cut him off, her voice sharper than before. Then to me, "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" What was I going to do? I'd spent 38 years being the supportive wife, the understanding partner, the woman who made things smooth and comfortable for everyone else. I'd raised our children largely alone while Richard built his career. I'd moved 3 times for his job opportunities. I'd sacrificed my own aspirations. I'd wanted to get my master's degree in library science, but we'd decided it wasn't practical with the kids and Richard's demanding schedule. When had we decided become code for "I gave up what I wanted"? The dinner plates were cleared, and the program began. Speeches from executives, a presentation about the charity the Gala supported, an auction for various luxury items. I barely heard any of it. My mind was spinning, years of small compromises and swallowed disappointments suddenly crystallizing into a clear picture I'd been refusing to see. About halfway through the program, Richard appeared in the doorway of the river room. His eyes scanned the space until they found me. He didn't approach, just gave a small wave and a smile that looked more like a grimace before disappearing again. It was a courtesy check, making sure I hadn't left, ensuring I was behaving appropriately, confirming I wasn't causing problems. The realization hit me with stunning clarity. I'd become someone whose feelings were secondary, whose presence was optional, who existed primarily to support Richard's life rather than having a full life of my own. And I'd let it happen. Susan was watching me, and when our eyes met, she nodded slightly, as if she could read my thoughts. "My daughter," she said softly, "asked me last year why I stay with David when he treats me like an accessory instead of a partner. You know what I told her? That love is complicated, that marriage is compromise, that you can't understand from the outside. But you know what she said back?" I waited, my throat tight. She said, "Mom, if I ever let someone treat me the way Dad treats you, I'd want you to tell me I deserve better. So I'm telling you now, you deserve better." She was 25 years old, and she had more clarity than I'd had in decades. Tears threatened, but I blinked them back. "Not here." not now. But soon, very soon, there would be a reckoning. The gala continued around us, oblivious to the small revolution taking place in my heart. As the evening drew toward its close, with people beginning to drift toward the exits, I made a decision. I wasn't going to wait for Richard to remember to collect me. I wasn't going to smile and pretend this was acceptable. I wasn't going to protect him from the consequences of his choices anymore. I stood, thanked Susan and the others at the table, and walked back into the grand ballroom. Richard was still at table 3, now standing and talking with the woman in red and several other colleagues. As I approached, I could hear their conversation, casual, relaxed, the kind of easy banter Richard and I used to share, but hadn't in years. "Richard," I said clearly, interrupting their conversation. He turned, surprise and something like panic flashing across his face. "Margaret, are you ready to go?" "I'm ready to go home," I confirmed. "But we need to talk. Tonight." The woman in red, I could now see her name tag read Vanessa Hartley, Marketing Director, looked between us with barely concealed interest. Richard's colleagues shifted awkwardly. "Of course," Richard said tightly. "Let's discuss this in the car." "No," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "We'll talk at home. But I want you to know, Richard, that what happened tonight, you deliberately hiding the fact that you'd be sitting separately from me, that you'd be spending the evening with your colleagues while I was relegated to another room. That isn't something I'm going to just accept. Margaret, please, this isn't the place. You made it the place when you decided I wasn't important enough to sit with you at your company's gala, when you chose to prioritize how things looked professionally over respecting your wife of 38 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa suddenly found her phone intensely interesting. Richard's face had turned a deep shade of red that I couldn't quite read. Anger, embarrassment, or something else. "I'll meet you at the car," I continued. "Take your time saying goodnight to your colleagues." I walked away with my head high, my hands steady, feeling more present in my own life than I had in years. Behind me, I could hear the whispers starting, but I didn't care. Let them talk. Let Richard deal with the gossip and the awkward questions. I dealt with being dismissed, with being treated as optional, with being lied to. It was his turn to be uncomfortable. As I collected my coat from the check room and made my way to the parking area, the October night air felt refreshing, cleansing. The stars were visible despite the lights from the manor, and the river rushed by in the darkness, constant and powerful. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if our marriage could survive this, not just this one incident, but the pattern of disrespect and dismissal it represented. I didn't know if Richard would be angry, defensive, or genuinely remorseful when we finally talked. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life being someone's afterthought. At 62, I had years ahead of me, and I was going to spend them being treated with the respect I deserved, whether that was with Richard or without him. When Richard finally appeared, his expression was unreadable in the darkness. We drove home in complete silence, but this time it was different. This wasn't the heavy, anxious silence of the drive there. This was the silence of a storm gathering strength, of change that could no longer be avoided, of a woman finally finding her voice after years of being silent. As we pulled into our driveway, I looked at our house, the home we'd lived in for 23 years, where we'd raised our family, where we'd shared countless ordinary moments that make up a life together. It was beautiful in the moonlight, familiar and solid. Tomorrow, everything might be different. Tomorrow, we might begin the hard work of rebuilding trust and respect, or we might start the painful process of acknowledging that we'd grown into people who no longer fit together. But tonight, I'd taken the first step toward reclaiming myself. And that, I realized as Richard turned off the car and we sat in the darkness, was worth whatever came next.